All right. Our passage this morning is in Genesis chapter 17. If you're using the Pew Bible, that is on, my marker has moved. It is on page 22. If you're using the Deep Blue Bible, which you get in third grade and can join along with us when you stay, it is on page 18. Again, Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 through 8. Then Abram was 99 years old. The Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. It will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give you as an everlasting possession to you and to your descendants after you. And I will be their God. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, this morning I'm going to reiterate the challenge that I have for my middle school kids. I'm going to pass it on to my older elementary as well. Every time you hear me say the word name, mark that down. Every time you hear me say the word covenant, mark that down. And if you're really smart and or the youth group, also, anything else you find interesting, go ahead and take those notes. Grown-ups, you can take notes too, but the youth group and I have got a little challenge going on when they're here. So if you see them on their phones, they're actually taking notes. It's okay, because they don't know what paper and pencil are, which is fine, because then they can text me the notes, and I get their answers, and everything's great. So here we are in Genesis, where God gives Abram a new name. And God also gives Abram a covenant. Last week, we talked about the faith of Abraham and Abraham responding to God. And after we had gone through all of our songs and our prayers and the sermon, and I busted out the Greek and we looked at that, one of our youngest congregants during communion ran to her father and said, I want to be with you, Daddy. And in that really quick moment, the passion and the joy and the ability to put questions aside and just want to be with the character of her father reminded me of why we have kids in service, because often in just about 4 or 5 words they sum up the whole sermon. The name of Abram means exalted father. And we've already seen that Abraham is going to be promised this great, wonderful nation. But God reinstates the covenant and says, Abraham, you're not just going to be an exalted father, you're going to be the father of a multitude. So again, God comes back and tells Abram/Abraham what the promises are, what the stuff is that's a part of this new journey, of this new people that God and Abraham will start together. And then God introduces his own name. God says to Abraham, I am El Shaddai, which quite literally means most powerful God. Because Abraham is about to go into the land. In the land of Canaan, there are all kinds of other gods that are worshipped. And God is saying to Abraham, I am El Shaddai, I am more powerful. I have more strength than those gods who aren't even real. Don't worry about them. I have the power. And it's to be a comfort. It's to be a marker for Abraham and his descendants of who it is they follow. Strength so often in our culture, I think it's misunderstood. I think we use it in the wrong way. We talk about having strength in numbers, which I think the original idea was that if you do something together, you're better than when you do it alone. But as I look around, I see an us versus them mentality. This idea that the strength in numbers is the more numbers you have, somehow the more right you are. We see it in politics. We see it in sports. We see it in our movies, right? The movie that I like made more money. It's got more numbers than your movie, so my movie is inherently better than yours. People fight about what is better based on the numbers. My team won more trophies, so they're inherently better than yours. My side of the argument, whether it's political or religious, has more numbers than yours, so we're inherently right. But I think when El Shaddai says, I am the most powerful God, he's coming in with Abraham not just to say, look at the strength, look at the stuff that I will give you. But God is saying, I want to enter into relationship with you. This is the first time, at least as I read through the book of Genesis, this is the first time that God says, I'm the God of the people. God will introduce himself as Yahweh. God introduces himself to Abraham as El Shaddai. And he'll say, follow me. He'll say, here's a covenant of the rainbow. I love you. Here's the covenant of the stars, and I will give to Abraham this great land. But this is the first time God says, I am the God of you. These people are my people. And again, these people aren't to be excluded off, and these are the ones who are right, because they have El Shaddai. This was supposed to be a city on a hill. This was supposed to be, come into these people and receive the love of God. Come in with these people and join in the covenant. But of course, people were in charge, so it didn't quite go that way. And God had to step out of heaven and remind them what it was that they were supposed to be doing, which was loving God and loving neighbor. So God sets up this covenant with Abraham. Now, we were told that a covenant, it's like a promise. It's like a contract. And when we have contracts between one person and another, or one group and another, and even in the scriptures, there'll be covenant between human and human. Everyone has responsibility. I have a covenant with GRU that they will give me water and electricity, and I covenant to give them part of my paycheck every month. That's our agreement. I have told Cox Communication that if you give me reliable internet, I will give you a little bit more of my paycheck every month. Everyone has a responsibility there. And if one person stops, then the other one says, oh, I don't have to be a part of that covenant anymore. But covenants with God work a little bit differently. Covenants with God rest on God's character. A covenant with God is a little bit like buying a car and being a co-signer. If you've ever been in the position where you don't have good credit, or heaven forbid you don't have any credit yet, and you try to buy a car, they're like, yeah, we don't really trust you, we need a co-signer. And maybe you've been in the position where a loved one doesn't have good credit and you've co-signed on that car. Well, there's two names on that contract. There's two names on that covenant, but no one cares about the kid without credit. The one responsible for all of that is the co-signer. God is the co-signer on our covenant. Yes, we're there. Yes, we're a part of it. Yes, we have responsibilities. But guess what? We don't always keep our responsibilities. And God says, you know what? This rests on my character, not on yours. I will go ahead and keep the covenant. We know this because Abraham in chapter 12 that we looked at last week, God said, here's the stuff. Here's a relationship with me. Walk in faith. And Abraham, even though he doesn't know where he was going, walks in faith. And Abraham's faith is so great that the book of Hebrews, its author says, hey, you want to know what faith is? Look at Abraham. And now here we are in chapter 17. And God says, formally, here's a covenant. Here's an agreement. Here's you and me, and really me, deciding what will happen next. Well, between chapter 12 and chapter 17, Abraham lies. And his lie puts his wife in really actual grave danger. And Abraham makes this lie out of self-preservation. And then a couple chapters later, Abraham and Sarah get together and they come up with this plot to change the terms of the covenant. Because God had told Abraham, just like the stars in the sky, your descendants will be. And here's how it's going to happen. And Abraham and Sarah go, yeah, but what if we did it this way? God could back out of this covenant clean and free at this point. They didn't keep their side. They didn't keep their faith. And God says, that covenant was never about you anyway, Abraham. It was about the God who calls to Abraham's descendants to be their God, to be their El Shaddai. When they walk in the land and they don't know what's going to happen. When they walk in the land and they do know that there's other groups there with armies and powers and walls and cities. God says, I am El Shaddai and I will be with you so that all of us can be in this relationship together. When Abraham drops his end, the covenant holds up because God is the co-signer. And God steps in and says, I will keep my covenant with you. Again, this is a covenant not just for Abraham, but for his sons and for their sons and their kids and their grandkids, and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And what I love is, yes, the cross is maybe the greatest covenant of love between God and humanity. And Jesus sat at that table with his friends and said, this is the new covenant. We're going to do it a little bit different, but it's a new covenant with the same God. I love the New Testament. I love Jesus. I love Advent. When we get to talk about Jesus, who is God becoming a person. But that God was all the way back in Genesis. That God who forgives people that don't deserve it was all the way back in Genesis. He comes to Abraham and says, all right, I've given you promise. I've given you a covenant. You've messed it up twice now. He's going to mess it up again, spoiler alert. God comes to him and says, this isn't about you, Abraham. This is about me and you. This is about me becoming your God. One of the reasons I wanted to spend my life in children's ministry is we take this book and we say, all right, children, here are all the people who love God like they did. Well, I'll tell you what, if you're reading closely enough, you really don't want to follow these people. You really don't. Abraham's a liar who plays favorites with his kids. Guess what his child does? He plays favorites with his kids and is a liar. His grandson is named Liar. That's what Jacob means. It means trickster. Who plays favorites with his kids so much that one of them ends up in a well left for dead. This is the family that God says, I'm going to be your God. This is the family that God says, we're going to have covenant one with another. God is the co-signer. It's not about us. It's about God's character. God is the main character of this book. In the beginning, God created the heavens. God said to Adam and Eve, here's one rule. And they said, yeah, but where's the tree? And they broke covenant. And God said, you know what? Let's start again. And their descendants break covenant to the point where God says, we got to start again, but I'll pull Noah and his family out and make covenant that I will stay with these people no matter what happens. He taps Abraham, and Abraham messes up, and his kids mess up. And we get to the nation of Israel, and they leave Egypt, and they're out there for 45 seconds and go, I don't know about this El Shaddai. Can we go back and be slaves? And if I was God, I'd be like, look, we're done now. I just did 10 plagues. I just wiped out half a nation to show you that I'm on your side, and you were in the desert for like a day and a half and you're giving up. I would have washed my hands, but God stays with them. He sends them prophets. He gives them kings. He tells them again and again that he loves them. And all the way back with Abraham, God says, there's this covenant between me and you. I will be your God. I will be a God of the people. So our application is this. When we face life, when we're in the desert, when grief and pain and sorrow comes into our life, we remember that it's El Shaddai. It's the most powerful God that we serve. And God hears those cries. God knows what's going on. He's called us to serve alongside. But when the problem gets bigger than us, rest on El Shaddai. And when we think that we're not able to serve with God, when we think that we're not good enough, Abraham left his wife in a harem in chapter 12 of Genesis. And God said, nope, that's not enough for me to stop loving you. Moses was a flat-out murderer. In cold blood, he kills a slave master. And God says, nope, You're the leader of the people. There is nothing you have done. There is nothing you can do. There is nothing you can imagine for God to say, I won't co-sign. God has co-signed on your life. And he said, here are the responsibilities. Here's the faith it takes to roll with me. But day in and day out, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know all the answers. El Shaddai will be your co-signer. Amen.